here we go. All right, Ms. Rafolia, please come up. And I guess we're going to have Mr. Eskelson and Ms. Jenkins and Ms. Lambert come on up as well. Good morning.
Morning.
All right, well, we provided an earmark in the, I guess, FY18 budget for the National Philharmonic and what was the year we provided the additional funding? FY17. And we've been asking for quarterly reports since then, and we haven't had one for a little while. We were consumed with, primary election politics. So why don't you walk us through briefly, Ms. Rafolio, the key points of your memo here, and how is the National Philharmonic doing?
Sure, I do have a prepared statement this morning.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for your time this morning. I'm here to report that National Philharmonic has proven to not only be good listeners to the council members, but to also be a good investment. National Philharmonic is a county large arts organization, a presenter, a performer, an educator, a community engager, a Strathmore resident partner, and a heart and soul provider, employing more than 120 personnel, providing artistic opportunities for more than 150 vocalists and numerous local artists. National Philharmonic is an economic driver to the Music Center at Strathmore and fills the beautiful hall approximately 30% of the year. As recognized recently by the Washington Post, National Philharmonic is the only orchestra to offer all kids free access to live classical music in the region. On behalf of the National Philharmonic, we do want to thank you for your recommendations, for your trust, your support and funding assistance. National Philharmonic will continue to be good stewards of the County Council's investments. We will continue to work alongside Strathmore to elevate the county's gem. National Philharmonic will also continue to seek support for its work in the community from the Arts and Humanities Council. We wish you, Councilmember Berliner and Councilmember Leventhal, continued success in your new adventures. You both are always welcome to join the National Philharmonic leaders and continue serving the arts in a very most rewarding fashion. Thank you for your assistance. The highlights really for the support summary that was provided talks about the end of fiscal 18 for National Philharmonic. I've outlined here in the third year of its recovery, the focus for the organization, that we will be recruiting new board members. We'll be maintaining the audience that we increased over the last 2 years and contributed revenue goals that we also met over the last 2 years. We are going to be monitoring the risk of the new concerts, the 3 POPs programs that we have included in the programming for this season. We are going to be managing the cash and the budget with less revenue sources from the county funding and from Arts and Humanities Council. We are also going to be planning fiscal year 20 strategies with a priority and focus on staffing and the development to contribute revenues in order to meet the demands of the National Philharmonic's revenue goals. National Philharmonic, as we've indicated, listened to all of the recommendations made over the last 2 years to do pop concerts that were more mainstream, to also look to program outside of the concert hall at Strathmore and engage the community. We've worked to fix our board, we've fixed our structure, the organization internally, we've paid our vendors, we've worked to reduce debt, we brought about an approved consultant, and we created a new strategic plan. We are doing better. So that would conclude some of the highlights for the National Philharmonic for the last 2 years, other than what's already distributed in the report.
Okay. Now, among the things that I've worked on in my 16 years here that didn't get a lot of attention, but that I think have always thought was meritorious and important, was to try to establish a stable funding and a generous funding stream for the arts without pitting one arts organization against any other. I just attended the Rockville Mid-County Democratic Breakfast Club with Mr. Elrich as the speaker, and he started out early in his remarks. He said, "We have no money," and he doesn't anticipate big infusions of new money. That he's actually preaching austerity if he becomes the next county executive. And under those circumstances, I've always felt that, when I started as a council member, some of the constituents who were backing me were not fans of the arts. They felt that it wasn't the best and highest use of public money, and that it was, a playground for the wealthy, and that public money shouldn't go into it. I've never agreed with that at all. I think that the cultural environment is part of what makes a place special. I do think it has significant economic development benefits, not only because it's attractive to employers to have a lively arts environment, but because the arts itself is an enterprise that provides a wide range of jobs, from performers and artists to the back room, to the development staff, to the administrative staff. So, and I understand that there is no successful arts enterprise that has zero public investment, that, thriving communities have major public investments in the arts. So I understand all of that. What I don't support, and what, for better or for worse, we'll see what happens in the future, are earmarks, because I don't think under any circumstances they can really provide a fair assessment of merit. I absolutely don't think that elected officials are best equipped to judge the merits of one symphony orchestra against another, or one dance company against another. It's not our area of expertise, and it will always come down to, politics and relationships, and early, when I got here, campaign contributions. And I'm very upfront about that. It was, abundantly clear to me when I ran my first race for council and people thought I was a likely winner, that I was attracting contributions from people I'd never heard of who were active with different arts organizations. So we've worked over the years to try to strengthen the funding formulas at the Arts and Humanities Council. And who knows the next executive or the next council, how they'll treat these types of issues. But I believe as strongly as I've ever believed that when individual arts organizations find that they're in trouble and come to the county for what is in effect a bailout, there's the issue of moral hazard. It provides an incentive for other arts organizations to find themselves in trouble. It puts the county at risk of throwing good money after bad, that you may be in an endless cycle of trying to bail out an organization that just doesn't have the wherewithal to survive. And that if we can continue to have a steady, stable, predictable, growing source of funding for all arts organizations, led by specialists in the arts who are best equipped to ascertain the merit and strength of organizations, that all the arts organizations will benefit from that. And no arts organization will feel the need to develop special relationships, hire a lobbyist, devote an extraordinary amount of time and energy to lobbying for their own individual funding, and that way the entire enterprise unravels. So I still believe that. I think I'm right. It hasn't been an issue that has gotten a huge amount of attention from the county council. I had an exchange of messages with Ms. Jenkins earlier this year, and I distributed my message to other council members in the hope that something would survive, with the next group. So we went through the list of what appeared as though they might be earmarks, and in some cases, like the Kid Museum, like the Gandhi Brigade, we treated those organizations as community organizations provided services to youth first, and the fact that the services they were providing related to the arts was really secondary. And I understand that from the standpoint of supporting community-based nonprofit service providers, not in the arts, it isn't likely that we'll get to a place where there will be zero earmarks, because council members, frankly, have a better understanding of what happens in terms of community development, youth development, serving the community. That we're much better grounded in that and able to make. There's always politics involved. You're never going to get the politics out of your politics entirely, but we're better able to make judgments that relate to merit. The one appropriation in the FY19 budget that I just couldn't explain, that we hadn't focused on, and that frankly had staff wrote it. We had new staff. Carolyn Chen is here. She's brand new. We had new staff advising us on grants. Nobody brought this to our attention. Was $49,700 through the county executive's community grants process. Now, historically, we've kind of deferred to the county executive and just said, all right, you get your grants, we get our grants. There have been a few exceptions where something was like clearly not ecumenical, where it was only benefiting worshipers in one religion, or it wasn't clear whether what they were doing was legal. Rare cases where there hadn't been a lot of scrutiny in the executive branch and the council called it out. Had this been brought to my attention prior to the passage of the budget, this $49,700 to provide accessibility and culture to kids through all free, all the time program, we would have had a conversation about it, because I regret that we didn't. I'd like to understand what it is, the $49,700. I'd like to understand why the National Philharmonic pursued an earmark, even though there was budget language that stated that it was the sense of the council that we would not provide any further earmarks after the FY17 budget for the National Philharmonic. And, it's our bad. I mean, we didn't catch it, so we're not going to claw it back. You've got the money now. But I regret it. I think it was I think I was not alert to it. I'll take responsibility for that. I think staff did not alert me to it. So why don't you tell us what that $49,700 is going to be spent for, and didn't we have an agreement that you wouldn't seek further earmarks?
I think let me ask or answer a little bit more to your first question. National Philharmonic is a nonprofit, and we are like all the other nonprofits in the county here in Montgomery. We spend a majority of our time looking for funding. And that funding comes in a number of different varieties, whether it's through foundations, whether it's through government funding, or whether it's through private contributions and any other opportunities for grants. When we write and spend a lot of time looking for grants in our research for these grants, we are applying for hundreds of grants. We devote a lot of time as a nonprofit to make sure that we fit the criteria for all of these grants. So the County Executives Collaborative Grant is available to all nonprofits in the county. You must do the due diligence and make sure you meet the criteria. National Philharmonic met the criteria with the program, the All Kids Free program. And so with that, we were advised to continue to apply, just like we would apply for any other grant application process. It's competitive and fully vetted. We apply for at least 30% more than what we receive in our grants, whether they're to foundations or other organizations for grant application process. So that being said, we have a grant writer that we contract with, who is out there looking and searching for grants that would be applicable to any of our programs that we have as an organization.
And what is it? What does it pay for?
All kids free access to every concert that all the National Philharmonic concerts.
And
so,
Lambert,
let me.
Is this unique in the county? Are kids able to attend classical music concerts? Are they able to attend other arts presentations, or is it unique at the National Philharmonic? Is this the only program like this in the county?
I'm not aware of any others.
As I mentioned, and I don't know if you saw the recent article in the Washington Post, but it was a letter to the editor about a month ago. But it is citing how unique National Philharmonic is with this program. There isn't another orchestra that is offering free access to kids. And I would also say that, National Philharmonic has had this as their platform since the early stages of the mission of the organization. We support all ages of kids, all pre-adulthood kids, to have access and education through the experience of live classical music. So much so that when National Philharmonic and Strathmore came together in 2004, 2005, Strathmore Music Center also saw this as an incredible opportunity and began offering Montgomery County Public School students free access to live classical concert to every second grader. And then again, a few years later, offered the same opportunity to fifth graders. So they also deemed that this mission is very appropriate and an educational experience for all of these kids.
Well, I remember that, and I was going to ask about the status of that there were these concerts that were made available to elementary school kids. Mm-hmm. And those were National Philharmonic concerts?
That's correct. It was first conceived with Peter Gajewski and Elliot Fansteel, and I believe Monica, Dr. Weiss, is that correct? Yes.
That's correct.
And that's still in effect, that there's
Oh, yeah.
a day at which Montgomery County school
In
kids?
fact, a full week. 8 concerts are dedicated to second graders
Right.
in a week, and it's about 13,000, 14,000, 12,000, depending on the year of the public school systems and how many kids are in the school that year. And then at one time, National Philharmonic was doing the fifth graders for a number of years, the concerts for them as well. And then in the last 3 years, I believe they've moved to a jazz program. So now Strathmore is offering, again, free live jazz exposure and blues exposure to fifth graders with a curriculum. All of these programs have curriculums to them, educational components.
And how is that cost covered?
Through various means. A lot of sponsorship and grants are coming to support the concerts in that manner. And then I believe also MCPS has some funding allocated for that.
Do National Philharmonic performances routinely sell out?
No, we don't routinely sell out.
So is there reason to think that the cost of, now, what's a kid, when all kids, all the time, all free, what's a kid, under 18?
That's correct, under 17.
Is there
Or
reason to
17
think
and
that a
under 18.
17-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 6-year-old sitting in a concert seat is taking a seat away from a paying adult?
Sure there is, when we do have solo concerts, yes.
But you don't have sellout concerts.
On average, I mean, I don't think that's applicable here. I think the applicability here is the mission of the organization, which is to serve educating kids in live classical music. And so we're offering that to not just those folks that are going to come regularly, but to any child that can come. I mean, in fact, we are targeting specific groups. We've written in our reports, quarterly reports for the last two years, exactly some of the groups that we do cover, which are Boys and Girls Clubs. We cover Girl Scout groups, Boy Scout groups, various other organizations that don't always find the means to give their clients opportunities to come and listen to live classical music. They're youngsters.
And does the $49,700 from Mr. Leggett's grants list fully cover that cost?
No, they do not. In fact, the program cost us about $150,000.
How? What's the cost? That's what I'm trying to
We're subsidizing tickets. We're subsidizing all of the revenues that we would have.
It's revenue foregone, but you can't literally say that you would have gotten the revenue, you just don't know. I mean, you're not turning people away, the concerts are not sold out.
There have been
so-
some concerts that we have turned people away, yes.
But in general, these are seats that you'll never know. You might have gotten that revenue, you might not have. It's not a hard estimate. There's no way to know. I mean, if I was to go out with my wife to a concert and my son, wanted to come, maybe he would come, maybe he wouldn't. The availability of a free ticket might increase the likelihood of his going. I don't know. It's hard to know precisely how much revenue is foregone.
If I might participate in the conversation, Todd Eskelson, Chairman of the Board. Our concerts typically have between 15 and 20% of the audience is children between the ages of 7 and 17. It's an active program that we actively advertise, that we actively encourage, that we make known to people. We do sell out concerts. We don't sell out every concert. We wish we did. But we sell out concerts. And from the first, when our program goes out from the first mailing, we accept tickets from people at between 7 and 17, and parents can bring their children, and the children can sit next to them in the same seats that the parents are sitting in. So this is an active program that we've invested in, and that we invest in every single concert, whether it's a sellout or not. And you can't tell in advance what's going to sell out and what's not going to sell out. If we could, we'd not be in a position like we're in. So this is something that we actively market. As
And is
far
this
as
brand new with this grant? Did this grant bring this
no,
program on?
this is something that we have done from the beginning.
So it had been part of your operating budget for some time, but this year you got an earmark to support it?
Correct.
Yep, I understand.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I've expressed my views. I mean, I'm leaving. I don't know. Maybe the future county executive will find that money's unlimited and that we can give away free concert seats to kids at every arts venue supported by Montgomery County. I doubt it. I think the whole grants process, as government is being reinvented, I think the whole grants process is going to need to be really very, very carefully looked at. We may have some discussion of that before this council expires. I don't know. Time is limited. It has always been my sense that the executive branch devotes not much scrutiny to, and I'm speaking OMB here, to its grants, not anything comparable to the scrutiny that the council puts into its. It's always been my belief that the more sound and defensible a grants process we have, the better for elected officials, because of necessity we are going to say no to more people than we are going to say yes. My esteemed County Executive, Mr. Leggett, and I have never seen eye to eye on this. Mr. Leggett has always felt that when you give grants to worthy recipients, they appreciate it, and it's all dollars well spent, and I understand. But I've never thought that there was much political benefit, because I think you always end up saying no to more people than you say yes to, and that includes the arts as well. So I don't like the practice of earmarks for the arts substantively. I don't think it's wise politically. And that's been my point of view. It's not a universal point of view. One of those who's never agreed with it, Mr. Berliner, and I'll call on him now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate that has been your view. I would just take issue with the word earmark, because I don't think this was an earmark. I think this was a grant process that has been in existence for some time. People followed the rules, followed the process. Our council approved it. There's nothing about this that is an earmark, other than it's an arts organization that is also a nonprofit that is doing work that I'm proud of, the work you're doing with our kids and making sure that kids are exposed to culture. I do think that that's an important part of your mission, and I'm pleased you're doing it, and I'm pleased you're getting some help in doing it, because it is something you are doing for the community. And so I just think you guys have done extraordinary work, and as you say yourself, you're living on a thin margin. Most art organizations live on a thin margin, but you are living on a thin margin with rising costs and lower help from the Arts and Humanities Council by virtue of the changes that have been made to large organizations generally across the board. And that's a different conversation, one that I actually don't share the same view as Ms. Jenkins and others with respect to the help we should be giving our large arts organizations. But I feel like you've done great work, that you've done above board. You did not come back for an earmark. You were true to your word. You did what every nonprofit in Montgomery County seeks to do, which is find money where you can, raise your hand, put in your application, be competitive, and win, because you had a good proposal. So I have a different point of view than the chairman, and just want to thank you for the work you've done.
I think it's meritorious to provide free access to classical music and jazz to young people. I think the great challenge we face is always deciding among the many meritorious things that come before us, and so in the case of the arts, it had been and continues to be my hope that decisions on funding the arts would be delegated to the county's arts agency, and that remains my view. So that remains my view. I don't know how $50,000 for allowing students to hear classical music and jazz compares to the other community grants. I would hope that that would be a decision made by the arts agency, and that there would be a steady funding stream. So that continues to be my hope. Mr. Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So let me start off by saying that I don't have issue with National Philharmonic. The county executive is the one who provided the grant. You asked for the money, he provided it. So, I mean, I can't fault you for going through and figuring out and beating the bushes and figuring out what falls. We told you to do that, actually. Told you to be creative and figure out ways to make yourself sustainable. So, and then we missed it on our end. So, mea culpa, just like the chair had said. I think that if we had caught it, it probably would have been a different outcome, and we wouldn't even be here today discussing it. But that being said, I do want to, and I'm going to ask Ms. Jenkins to comment, because I haven't heard from her in terms of impact. Here's my concern, and I share sort of the same concern that the chair has expressed. I think that our grants process as a whole is one that's flawed and broken. It's one in which we've separated out between the county executive, who has a very different process. I won't criticize it by saying it's not as thoroughly vetted. I know Chuck Short, who works very hard and knows a lot of organizations in the community, but it is a very different process from the process we have here on the council. And so then we have groups competing and going to both the county executive and the council through two very different processes for the same money coming from the same big pocket. It's all county money. The county executive doesn't own any money that's separate from the Montgomery County Council. It's all county taxpayer dollars. And I think it's quite silly that we make groups go through these multiple processes to get the same money. I mean, we have multiple organizations that get $50,000 from the county executive and $45,000 from the council and say, well, the county executive gave us $5,000 more. He likes us more than you do. Well, sir, ma'am, it's all our money. It's $95,000 of county money that you received. And so I think that overall, when we look at it, it's my hope that with the new county executive and a lot of new members of the county council, we can relook at this process because it's not one that works. And this is an example of why it doesn't work, because it doesn't have the interests of all parties that are involved in terms of making those decisions. If it was a decision that the county executive felt strongly about, then it should be a conversation with the council about justification and why this happens and why he thinks this needs to happen. And the outcome could have been that way. I don't know. You know, it could have been that way if we had had a conversation, but it didn't happen that way. And so I think that it's going to help us because I do feel, and this is another thing that the chair said, that when you start playing favorites, and what happens is it's not about, again, it has nothing to do with you, but it's about access. It's about access and exposure. National Philharmonic, just like you said, the only Philharmonic in this area and the one who does the most with Montgomery County and with our kids. So, of course, you've got that. But a local dance troupe who's in downtown Silver Spring doesn't have that same visibility. And they could have the same needs and be impacting the same kids that you're looking to outreach, maybe not at the same magnitude, but certainly at the same overarching goal. But they don't get that same sort of exposure and don't get the access and therefore don't get the money. And so it is playing favorites to some extent. And I acknowledge that with our grants process and the reason why we have a grants advisory council, it's there to bring folks in to make sure that everybody kind of has a level playing field. And again, it's nothing that you've done. So this isn't criticizing National Philharmonic. I have no issues with you in this. But I do want to ask Ms. Jenkins as to whether or not other groups, because my fear is that folks will see this and then say, oh, this is another avenue, something they haven't thought about before as a way to circumvent the Arts and Humanities Council grants process to get additional funding for their individual arts organizations. So if you could comment on that, please.
Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for having me this morning. To directly address your question would be to stand back and to look at the county's grants processes overall and to look at intention. And I think that your points today are all so valid in that the perspective that we are all here today, Arts and Humanities Council as a non-departmental agency of the government, doing a contract work with the government to be able to support arts and humanities organizations in our fold, is to take a step back and ask ourselves, what is the intention? And if the intention is to help these arts and humanities organizations grow, then I think that the conversation really is with the governmental agencies that are making the decisions about how these organizations get money. To address Councilmember Leventhal's remark about our conversation over the summer, bless you, it was really to seek a better understanding of what is the intention and to try to understand how agencies can work together versus in diametrically opposed ways to achieve that goal. And so, yes, organizations have sought and have received funds outside of the Arts and Humanities Council for their activities. And it's not a value judgment, everything is valid. If an organization says, here's my budget and here's my need, I understand that that's valid. I think that for us, though, if we are here together in this contractual relationship, in the governmental agency relationship, it's a good idea for us to stand back and say, okay, what is the intention and how can we achieve it, and what are our various parts in that? What parts do we play in that? For us, it's having an open and transparent grant processes that are fair and consistent, so that everyone who wants some kinds of funds are able to get it. We're in the business of trying to reduce barriers to access and try to make sure that we are serving the entire demography. That's our intention. We have a mission and a value statement that kind of speak to that. And I think that if these different agencies, whether it's the county executive's office or the county council's council grants office or Arts and Humanities Council, if we could just join hands and figure out what our intention is, then when we see organizations who are seeking additional funds for positive youth outreach or other kinds of capital improvements or whatever the technology improvements, we can understand, well, what is the intention of this department versus this one, and under whose agency do we think needs to serve this need, and how can we best address these tax-paying organizations? Even though they are tax exempt, there's still a lot of tax revenue that's coming through them. What is our intention to maximize that, reduce exposure, reduce insight collaboration? That, I think, is really the bigger question. Because if it's National Phil, or if it's the Gandhi Brigade, or if it's only whoever it is, their needs are valid. So my real question is, how can we meet those needs in a way that's fair and consistent and transparent for all parties?
I really appreciate that answer, and I think that, the chair brought up a very good point too. It's interesting if the members of the Health and Human Services Committee, I hope to be the one returning member, and I think that, again, we're going to have to really take a look at what it is that we're going to do moving forward with how we handle our grants as a whole. And I really want to say that because, again, and I just want to tell National Phil, you're basically off the hook in my mind. This is about us really figuring out what we want to do next. And I think that, the chair has espoused for a very long time about doing grants for Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless, when we know that every single year we give grants to Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless for the same work that they do over and over again. And we play these games with our budget. And I really see it that way, to try and make it seem as though this looks like this. And it's no offense to Ms. Lambert, because Ms. Lambert has a boss. And that boss is saying this is what our strategy is going to be. I've expressed my concerns as council president in working directly with the county executive on a budget, asking to do something that was cleaner. I agree with you. What we should be doing is setting priorities for us as a county and saying these are the things that we want to fund and move forward, how best to do that, while also having a competitive process that's out there because we don't know that we can't fund everything. We can't put it all out there. But at the same time, and we have to then stick to those guns in terms of understanding that and explaining to folks I can't do everything for everyone, right? And having a clean process that everyone understands, that everyone has access to, that's when our constituents feel confident. And the players, because they all know that, hey, look, we're all going to be treated equally, and I know that some days I might win, some days I might not win as much. But the reality is that if we have a process like that, it just makes it so much better for us in terms of people's faith in the process, faith in us as government, and faith that the needs are going to be addressed in the community. And so I really think that, and I look forward to that, having that conversation with whoever the new county executive is, having that conversation here in HHS, and having that conversation with some of our other grants advisory councils and with Carolyn to really talk about what the next steps for us are. And again, nobody should fear, because again, you're all doing great work. You're doing great work. You righted your ship. You got yourself back in order. That's great. That's tremendous. It's not easy to do, right? We did it with Olney, and I saw Olney come back. I represented Olney at the time, and I was standoffish and like, look, I don't know if I remember my conversations with the county executive. I don't know. I don't know if they'll be able to do it. They were in a really bad spot, but they turned it around. You did too, and so kudos to you. Great job, right? But aside from that, we've just got to make sure that we come up with a system that I think more people can have faith in, more people can really feel is addressing the needs of all, where everybody is on a level playing field. I think that's the ultimate goal for us moving forward.
And if I may, I want to say that September 3rd was my 10-year anniversary serving in this position. It's been an interesting 10 years. Very interesting working with all of you, and I've enjoyed it immensely. One of the things that kind of rocked me to my socks this summer was the commitment from the County Council towards racial equity. And I don't want to leave my chair today without saying how proud I am that our county council thought enough about the importance for equity to issue such a resolution. And this situation, this is about equity and access, not maybe not racial equity, but equity overall. You know, it's a privilege to be able to know about the different systems and the different mechanisms in place so that if you want appropriations, you can go for it. And there's a certain group of people, organizations, the community that know how to do that and do it really well. But and they deserve it. But there's a whole swath of community members who need it also, but don't know how to do it. And I just want to work together with the county council so that we are engaging in equitable practices for all of the county residents, so that if there is access to funding for the arts and humanities, the access is made in a way that's equitable to all the parties who might need to participate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, okay, we're not quite done yet. I would like to praise National Philharmonic for righting its ship as well, although there are, potential storm clouds on the horizon, to stick with the maritime metaphor. And in the long run, I do think that, we're giving out more than $10 million a year in grants when you combine the council and the executive. It's a non-trivial amount of money. And if we anticipate the cost of government to continue to rise, if we don't anticipate a massive influx of new revenue to drop from the sky, that we're going to have to continue to make it as we can sustainably, we've got to have our successors. I'm leaving, but those who are involved in allocating the money have got to ask hard questions about equities, about sustainability, and the grants process is a mess. It's not efficient. We've tried to have third-party review here at the council, but the number of grants has outstripped our ability to monitor them well, and we missed this one. I mean, I doubt I would have voted for it. I think it's lovely that all children can attend classical music concerts. I assume you're not assembling, the economic or demographic data on those children. My guess would be that most children who are going to accompany their parents to a symphony orchestra, it's hard to know how many of them would be unable to attend that symphony orchestra but for that free ticket. Some, you don't have data on that, so we can't say. How much is a ticket to a National Phil concert?
Our average ticket price is $52.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Our average ticket price is $52.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so the other big issue then that is raised in your report, Ms. Ferfolia, and it's highlighted in the staff memo, is the issue of the rising cost of occupying space at Strathmore. And so we've asked the Office of Legislative Oversight to look into the revenue structure of Strathmore and the Strathmore Hall Foundation, including data about annual rents and/or fees charged to its artistic partners. The OLO report will examine and describe Strathmore's and the Strathmore Hall Foundation's overall financial structure, including its financial relationship with the county, its artistic partners, and public and private donors. The report will also include research about other similar arts centers, exploring whether other jurisdictions operate arts centers via public-private partnerships, how other centers structure financial relationships with artistic partners, and the venue's overall financial structures. So we may not have this before the end of this calendar year. It may not be something that the current members of this committee will be able to look at. I want the county to provide strong, stable, growing support for the arts and humanities. That's always been my view. I think that support it deserves scrutiny so that it is effective, that it benefits the widest possible array of organizations in a manner that's fair to all organizations and that doesn't require any organization to devote undue amounts of its limited resources to lobbying or to an enormous amount of attention to its needs, because there's not an arts organization that doesn't have needs. There's not an arts organization, to my knowledge, that doesn't operate hand to mouth. It's something, you're always going to be scrambling for funds. I don't dispute what Mr. Berliner says, that a grant was made available to you and you took it. I understand that. However, there ought to be a mechanism for funding the arts. This is clearly an arts activity. This is not, it's not comparable to, I wouldn't call it a positive youth development activity. It's not targeted to at-risk kids. It's not targeted in any way. Any young person between 7 and 17 can take advantage of this. In any event, you're driven to a difficult set of choices because the cost of the facility that you occupy keeps going up. The arrangement with Strathmore is unique. We've, in other settings, told tenants in county facilities that they may not charge rent to subtenants. There's no consistency there on the use of county facilities. I understand that this is a big part of Strathmore's business model, and I am not in any way suggesting, and it's not going to happen in my time here anyway, that we withdraw support from Strathmore. In fact, there ought to be some mechanism to understand whether the cost of occupying Strathmore is placing burdens on its tenant organizations that the county could assist with in a fair way, not a targeted or earmarked way. So I may not be here for that conversation, but it's something that we're looking at in the hope of stabilizing the situation of the tenants and not placing the tenants at constant fear of being unable to cover your costs. So that's another real issue here. The last thing I wanted to say in terms of the long-term storm clouds on the horizon, you mentioned that you don't have a significant endowment, and I don't think that's something the county is going to be able to help you with. Do you have a strategy for that?
We do. We started endowment 3 years ago. 3 years ago, we initialized the proper structure for an endowment, and then an endowment campaign centered around the 10th anniversary of being at partner residence there at Strathmore Music Center, and raised a little over $100,000, about $120,000. So that's what the initial fund is for the endowment, and we're working to continue that growth is there for the endowment.
Okay. Well, Ms. Jenkins, congratulations on 10 years in your post.
Thank you, Councilmember Lemon.
I didn't realize it had been that long. The time really goes rapidly.
It has, hasn't it?
Yeah. And Ms. Ferfolia, thank you for your leadership. You've done a good job, and you have been responsive to what the council said. And I don't blame you for accepting a grant that the county executive made available to you. Of course you did that. And Ms. Lambert, I don't think that grant got adequate scrutiny, and I don't think it got adequate scrutiny in the executive branch or here. And again, I'm sorry about that. It was a very busy spring for many reasons. And so our staff didn't catch it, and the council members didn't catch it, but I regret it. If I could do it over again, I wouldn't have supported that grant. And in the long term, there's going to have to be a serious conversation about how grants are allocated as new people occupy these offices and look at some of these issues with a fresh set of eyes. It really needs a fresh set of eyes. It's not, I don't feel good about the way we're allocating public funds in community grants generally. I feel pretty good about the way we're allocating public funds in the arts and humanities, except when something like this comes along, because it runs the risk of unraveling the whole enterprise. And that's my point, is that, you know, if there's more and more opportunities to get county funding outside a process that has the participation of the arts community in putting it together, in the long run, that's not going to be good for the arts community. communities. So that's my view. Does anyone else want to make any further comments on the panel or on the?
I'd like to just say that I'm in agreement with your concept of making the arts grant, or the grants and the process more participatory and more fair. And I think that's a wise use of county tax dollars. I think, though, that we have to deal with the underlying grants process that's in place and make sure that it actually is responsive. If you look at what has happened to National Philharmonic, and in particular this year, we have had a huge decrease in the amount of funding that's come from the county. And
A 13,483 decrease.
year to year, but if you look at it over the whole time of the reduction in process that was implemented, it's in excess of $400,000. And we need to make sure that large arts organizations have access to the process. Right now, I don't feel that we do. So as part of the entire review and of the entire process, we need to look at it and make sure that all of the participants in the arts organizations have access to the process and can make it fair and transparent so that we do understand exactly how it works. Because it was sprung on us 5 years ago, and I'm not sure that we still know how it works. And we have serious questions. So with that, I'm supportive of that and will pledge to participate if given the opportunity.
Okay, well, I don't know if there will be another opportunity to talk about how the decisions were made with respect to the treatment of large organizations versus small organizations. It's a challenge with limited funds. You want to support both large organizations and small organizations.
It's inherently a political process, whether you do it at the county council level or you do it at the committee level. And I understand that, and would say, with respect to your moral hazard argument earlier in the conversation, that's a definite risk. But as far as National Philharmonic goes, we don't make county contributions to candidates. We don't employ lobbyists. We don't devote enormous amounts of time to that, only as we do in fundraising overall. So, I mean, we are a community-based organization, and we are trying to do the best that we can by our organization, using all of the processes that we have available to us. And I appreciate that you recognize the good hard work that we've done. And multiple times you've said it's not about National Philharmonic, but in fact it is. I mean, we're the ones sitting here, and we're the ones who are the example of the process, and I feel like we are the ones who are being made an example in the process. And that's fine. But we also need to then have the ability to participate in that process and contribute our views in that process, and I don't believe that we have had that. So going forward, you or other people who are occupying your positions, which are hard, we would like to be participating in that conversation.
Okay, well, that's a valid point. So, Ms. Jenkins, how do organizations have their input considered by the AHCMC board?
Well, I'd like to give an answer specific to Mr. Eskilsson's statement right now, because 5 years ago, there was a decision that was made and an agreement between National Philharmonic and the Arts and Humanities Council that National Philharmonic participated in to reduce the grandfathered status that National Philharmonic had enjoyed for over 8 years. And to that point, the agreement noted that there would be a reduction from 18% of your budget to 11% of your budget to now the same that all other organizations get, which is 5.5% of their budgets, in a grant award to your organization. So I, for the record, must disagree that National Philharmonic did not participate in that conversation 5 years ago or make the agreement with the county council and the Arts and Humanities Council in written form that agreed to the way that the grandfathered status would be reduced over time. That said, there are guidelines that are on our website that articulate the way that grants are, the intake for grants, the application process. We host webinars and workshops that help organizations understand the process. We have an open panel meeting where applicants can come and hear the panel comments. We have one-on-one meetings after the panel convenes with the arts organizations to review the panel comments. And we just had one, in fact, with Leanne, to assure ourselves that the panel comments did reflect what also the applicant heard. And then the Arts and Humanities Council processes your grant applications in the pool of large organizations. We determine how much we can give each organization based on the budget. This year was particularly competitive. We had 4 more applicants in this pool of applications, as well as those applicants, the overall budgets of the organizations increased and our budget remained flat. So this year was a particularly difficult year. While we were able to give out 6% of organizations' budgets last year in the grant award, this year we will only able to give 5.5. However, prior to the awards, we hosted a conversation with all of the organizations in this field and articulated how and why that was going to be done. The formula for grants applications are in the guidelines themselves, so organizations can basically calculate and predict what their grant will be year over year. In addition to that, our grants officers call the organizations prior if there are questions to just make certain that everybody understands how the budget is being calculated for the determination of the grant award. So I really have to counter Mr. Eskilsson's remarks that the process isn't open, the process isn't transparent, because grantees, you right this second can go on to the our website, see an overview, attend workshops in person, attend webinars, hear about the process, and know far in advance how the grant will be calculated, on top of the fact that we have a written agreement with National Phil that clearly articulated year over year how the grant would be reduced based on the fact that you had enjoyed grandfathered status for several years as you transition from a community-based orchestra to your residence at Strathmore.
I actively participated in those discussions, and it was told to us this is what will happen, and that's what happened. So yes, we did understand what was happening, and we've been working very hard to make sure that we continue to exist. And as far as stable support, I think we've done very well in continuing to do what we've done in spite of the large reduction in funding that we've had. Secondly, as to the transparency, and we have participated in these processes, we have received answers that have not been wholly satisfactory in understanding these processes, and we need to probably continue this conversation offline. Because we do feel that there is some issues that need to be dealt with in that process. And that's what it's an ongoing process between the organizations, absolutely.
Well, there will never be enough money. I do hope that the AHC-MC board is receptive and responsive to input from the field, but the field will not always agree either. Obviously, large organizations believe that the lion's share of arts dollars should be allocated to large organizations, and smaller organizations have a different point of view, and that's going to chronically be the case. And as far as why National Philharmonic is the one in the hot seat at this moment, I'm sorry if it feels like a hot seat. The precedent was that Olney was in deep trouble, and the council, with great regret and a lot of contention among council members, agreed to appropriate a large amount of money with the understanding that there would be quarterly reports, and that with advice from the Arts and Humanities Council, Olney would get itself out of the red and into the black. And so when we faced a similar situation with National Philharmonic, we agreed that we would get periodic updates. We skipped at least one, where we would hear how things were going. And then in that period of time, a concern was raised that that earmarks had been allocated, even though there had been an understanding that there wouldn't be earmarks. You can dispute or debate the use of the word earmark. It was a community grant. It supports your general program. You had been providing these free tickets to young people for a long time. You got some extra funding for it. Mr. Leggett approved it. The council didn't object to it, so no rules were broken. I'm not suggesting that rules were broken, but it points up some large issues with respect to how grants are allocated, how oversight is exercised. Even here, I mean, our staff said to me, gee, we missed this, we're sorry. It's something we should have had a conversation about. Mr. Berliner.
Just briefly, Mr. Chairman, my hope is that there will be a larger conversation about the role of large arts organizations and the support, because I was one of those people and have been one of those people that have never been comfortable with a significant reduction in support of large organizations. I get the equity lens, I get the desire to support as many organizations as we can, but the financial constraints on large organizations, large arts organizations, is fundamentally different than small organizations. And the notion that you would have the same percentage apply for large organizations as small organizations has never sat well with this member of the council. And so I felt like what we have seen here is a reduction from $267,000 in FY11 to $107,000 in FY19 is a pretty big hill to climb for an arts organization to fill that gap. And so I just, myself, there's a reason why the large organizations have come together to argue for themselves, because they have not felt that they have been treated well. And so that is just a reality. You know that reality. Everybody here knows that reality, that there has been this schism between the large arts organizations and the smaller arts organizations and your organization for years now. And that's one of the reasons why we are where we are today in this conversation, and have been, from my perspective. So there are lots of points of view, but as we examine the role of your organization, the needs of arts organizations, I hope the spotlight will be also on what is appropriate level of support for the large arts organizations that contribute so much to our county. That's my personal view.
Councilmember Berliner, if I may, large organizations right now are getting the top amount appropriation of their budget that can be given the amount of money we have and the amount of organizations that are competing for it. They are getting the maximum amount, which is at the top of what they've ever gotten.
What is the formula, the percentage for large organizations of each dollar that comes out of AHCMC? What percentage goes to the large organizations?
About 89% of the money that comes into the Arts and Humanities Council goes, we have about 150 organizations in our funding pool, and of that, 28 organizations are in the category that National Phil is in, and those 28 organizations get about 89% of the funding, sir.
So of the remaining 11%, there are more and more claimants because the new organizations form all the time.
Absolutely.
And that becomes a source of strife.
There was a 58%.
There's not a fixed amount of money, but it's not, the amount of money is not growing as fast
Yes, that's
as the
correct.
demands upon that amount of money, because there's an understanding that if you operate in Montgomery County and you meet certain requirements, you're eligible for funding. So
Absolutely.
as new organizations start, the large organizations are disturbed that the 11% that goes to them is not available to those that are getting the 89%, the large organizations.
Absolutely. And then on top of that, this year, we saw a 58% increase in just one of those smaller organizations. So demand is really high. And then again, to be clear, National Philharmonic, when they got their grandfather to move status to move into Strathmore, they were grandfathered in at the current amount that they were getting from the county council before Arts and Humanities Council grants. And that grandfathered amount brought them in with a budget that at its highest ended up to be about between 11 and 14% of their budget. Every other organization in their same category, the other 27 organizations or so, we could only afford to give them about 6% of their budget. So our goal over the years was to bring everybody in line And as National Field became more comfortable in Strathmore, the agreement was that the grandfathered status would reduce every year so that everybody in the category would get about the same appropriation, the same percentage of their budget in a fair and equitable way. So to be honest, it has not been ever the arts and humanities' intention to simply reduce funding for the sake of doing so. Our intention in our contract with the county is to support and grow the arts organization. Our goal, though, is to do it in a way that's fair for the other organizations. We weren't able to give organizations more than about 3.5% or 4% because a large percent of the funds was going to just one organization. Now we've been able to equalize that, and so that funding has come down, and we've been able to spread that across the other 27 or 28. And it's never been our intention to do anything otherwise, sir.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Oh, Mr. Rice. Yep.
So, again, as a person who hopes to return, I think that this is a part of a much larger conversation that really is one in which we've had conversations for a long time about our large arts organizations. I've served on the board at BlackRock for a while and have had conversations about what the future for large organizations hold. And Ms. Rafolia knows I had a great conversation with her about some of the unique things that BlackRock did in terms of diversification to help them to be more successful. She knows she worked with the director directly and met with them and instituted some of those same sorts of changes within National Philharmonic. So, but it is going to be a conversation with, again, Mr. Chair, as you said, with a potential county executive candidate who's talking about a very austere budget, that if that's the case, there's not going to be any more money. So just sheerly shifting it around isn't going to be a solution for anyone. It's really not. I mean, at that point, you're taking from one and giving to another. You're not growing the overall pie. And so it's one in which I think that what Ms. Jenkins has been talking about in terms of the arts organizations coming together, I really think, and just imparting my advice, is that your best bet is to partner with all of the organizations, to have the bigs, the mids, and the smalls all come together and really start to forcefully push for additional arts funding. I mean, that's the real solution, not about changing the formulas so that one person gets, because everybody's a loser in that case. I mean, and I'll just impart my wisdom from the school system. The school system certainly understood when it came to their capital budget that if they continue to fight each other for those projects, you're going to have a heck of a lot of losers. But if you start trying to grow that pie, all of a sudden, there are some things that you might be able to do. Again, you're not going to be the big winner and have everything, but you're going to get additional beyond what you had before. And so I really would suggest that instead of just trying to, and I'm not saying you're doing this, I'm just saying this is my advice for arts organizations as a whole, instead of trying to figure out ways in which you individually might benefit, the best thing to do is to partner together so that you all can benefit and lift all of those boats, because that's really the way in which I see the only way that we're going to see a significant increase in arts funding for any particular organization. Because as we look at revamping this process, it's actually going to be tighter, right? And so that means that folks wouldn't have as much access as they have now. So I say that to kind of warn folks that, look, you know, if we start getting more stringent with our requirements, with our process, you're going to want to have something out there that guarantees that everybody's getting a little something from that process. And so that would just be, again, my advice as I look at this moving forward. I did just want to say one thing that is out there. Just again, a bit of advice. The drama, the issues that go on within arts and humanities, same thing I say with school system when I deal with them directly, keep that to yourself, because when you start involving us in that, then we start jumping in,
We try to
and
fix
it might
it.
not be, and it might not be the outcome you want, right? So I would just, again, for word of advice, because I can tell you we've done it before, and the outcomes haven't necessarily been what the individuals want. If you want us to jump in and get involved in a process, we can, but it might not behoove you to do so because you might end up on the losing end. So that's just my word of
That's
advice.
very well said. The whole, that was all very well said, and I endorse it. I think my advice to the arts and humanities community is that it act as a community.
Yep.
That it vet funding issues internally, that a board that is trying to foster an appreciation of the arts enterprise and support for the enterprise is receptive to the concerns of all organizations. I do agree that from the get-go, I've been saying, the county council is not best suited to determine the merits of various arts organizations. You can count on the District 1 council member to advocate for organizations in District 1. You can count on the District 2 council member to advocate for BlackRock. I mean, there are things that you can predict, but that doesn't necessarily translate to overall improvement in the quality or the prevalence of arts and humanities activities in the county, and in fact, it can lead to a balkanization, and that's been my fear all along. So yes, I mean, I think there have been good efforts, annually during the budget to show that the arts and humanities community acts as a community, but I think that really is important, that if there is internal conversation within the community about how to do this best and most fairly, recognizing that there are new aspirants, new entrants, new talent, new creativity, new ideas, things we haven't seen before. We have to be open to that. We can't continue to have the exact same arts enterprise that we had 20 or 30 years ago. That doesn't serve anybody's benefit. That doesn't benefit the arts. So, and the last thing I would say too, and I think we've got this, but it's important to put it on the record. I do appreciate, I loved the NASA collaboration that I attended, the Music of the Spheres and the, translation to photographs of the solar system and the universe, and it was great. And it was a popularization, and some might say, a cheapening of the quality of performance, but I think it was a great way to get butts in seats, and that's going to be a challenge. It was a challenge for Olney. I remember the Olney artistic director saying, well, for heaven's sakes, we're going to have to do Annie every year. Well, they do Annie every year because people want to see Annie, and then that gives them the room to push the envelope creatively in some other ways within some constraints. It's not going to be feasible only to put on performances that don't draw audiences. I'm telling you what you know and what you've mastered, is that unfortunately there is going to have to be a gesture to public opinion if you want to be a sustainable enterprise. People are going to attend concerts that they enjoy, and if you're challenging them to the degree that they don't enjoy it, they're not going to buy the ticket or bring their kid along for free. So I think you've done that well, but that's something that the arts enterprise has just got to cope with. I mean, there's a market, and if you're not meeting the market, to the extent that artistic enterprises want to push the envelope and be challenging, that's important from the standpoint of creativity and new ideas and broadening the mind. But it has to be within the general constraints that you have to attract audiences with what you put on your program. And I commend you for recognizing that. That hasn't always been the case with some of our large organizations, and it wasn't the case with Olney. And Olney had to have a sort of cold splash of water in the face to realize, yeah, well, Annie, that's pays the rent. We got to put on Annie because people want to see it. I think that's it. Mr. Rice? Yep. Okay. All right. Well, further conversations in all this regard. Thank you for your work. We wish many years of success to the National Philharmonic. It's been good working with you both.